BrainMind. I am Reema Khan, the CEO of Green Sands Equity, an investment firm in technology and healthcare. And Tom, will you introduce yourself?
I'm Tom Oxley. I'm the CEO and founder of Synchron, an implantable brain-computer interface company.
Will you tell us about how your technology works?
Sure. Brain-computer interface is the connection of some device from the brain to an outside device that allows a direct connection. We're part of a wave of companies who are looking to utilize volition, which generally arises from the area of the brain called the motor cortex, decodes volition and then converts that into a control signal that can manipulate an external device in a way that's useful for that person. So for us and what seems to be other companies is the starting point is the ability to take over mouse and keyboard control of digital devices for people whose hands are not working.
So this could be also for someone with severe arthritis, perhaps?
Yeah, we're thinking about motor impairment is your ability to use your muscles to engage with the world, and we've constrained that to the use of muscles to, say, make a selection on a touch screen. So it's not just a neurological condition. It might be that your joints don't work, arthropathy. It might be that you have cerebral palsy. It might be that you have a tremor. So anything that stops you being able to make selections on the screen in the way that you want would be the people who this technology could help.
And how are you doing this? So you go through, it's a minimally invasive, but it is invasive, and how does it actually work? Talk to us about your device.
I think there are 6 companies now building implantable BCIs. So one requires removal of the skull and removal of dura and then putting needles in. One removes the skull and puts a silicon device on top of the surface of the brain. And then there's a couple of variations of that. And then we utilize the blood vessels to get into the brain. So the blood vessels also sit on the surface of the brain. And so we've identified our technology position is around delivering electronics into blood vessels that sit on the surface of the brain, and then the signal processing and electronics that drive a system.
Okay, and what are your expectations as far as you talk about a platform? There are many other devices and applications that you have in the works. What are you looking at, and how far is that from FDA approval?
We're focused on a motor neuroprosthesis. So neuroprosthesis is another term for BCI, but it infers that you're restoring a lost function. So I think it's important that as we move into, as BCI moves from the sort of tech domain into the clinical medicine domain, it has to serve a purpose that is clinically meaningful for patients.
Sure.
And so we have now enrolled 10 human patients in 2 studies. We've just closed out the 2nd study. The company is now in a position where our team, our software team, our decoding team, our field clinical engineering team are working with those patients who have devices in. We're building a software layer where I'm building integrations, and we're preparing for manufacture at scale, and we're going to now launch a pivotal study over the course of the next 18 months.
Is the implant done by normal surgeons, or is there a separate robotic surgery that you do similar to like Neuralink?
If you need open brain surgery that involves removal of the skull, you need to go to a open neurosurgeon.
Sure.
That's usually in a tertiary level hospital or quaternary level hospital. The physicians doing our implants are called interventionists. And so that's neurosurgeons, radiologists, and neurologists. I'm a neurologist. That's my training. That's what I do. And they do it in the level of a cath lab, which are available at secondary hospitals. So I think one quite significant difference with our approach to other approaches is that there are thousands of physicians that can perform a procedure that's pretty similar to putting in a cardiac pacemaker, which has been around for a few decades.
So it's easier in many ways.
We think the procedure will be done in a couple of hours in a day procedure. And it's not open brain surgery, so it's a different workflow and go-to-market consideration.
And the material of what you're putting in through the blood vessels, does that disintegrate, fall apart over time?
No, so stents that go into the heart for, say, heart attacks, or stents that go into the brain, we're using the exact same materials that we know can last a lifetime.
Okay. Tell me about the comparison to people who are doing brain-computer interface for language. and for communication. How is their technology not a challenge to you in any which way? Because if they can do that, I'm thinking that seems like the harder thing, then they can probably also do yours. And you're saying, I'm just focusing on that. How are you differentiating yourself to say, yeah, sure, go ahead, good luck. Happy to see you guys do that, but this is how it works best.
So the way speech is being decoded right now is through the interpretation of motor phonemes. So a phoneme is the sound that you make with your mouth and your throat that creates the certain components of words. So actually that's a subset of the motor system. So the motor system controls your muscles. You create language from the creation of sounds. So in a sense, speech decoding of the phonemes of what you might like try to mouth with your throat or your mouth is pretty sophisticated. Our view is, so that's really cutting edge science, but for a commercial scale product, you don't need to go that far to have a huge impact. If you can move a cursor around a screen and click on a keyboard, you can create the words and you can use predictive text, so you don't need to go to that level of sophisticated decoding. So I think the world, where science is moving is this decoding of this incredible scientific capabilities, which is bleeding edge. But for a commercial scale product, you just need to help patients select something on a screen. So,
and what is your latency like? If I'm thinking in my mind, I'm thinking, I would like to turn the camera off. Okay, so I'm intending to do it. That's my volition.
Yeah.
How long before I'll actually be able to do that through a prosthesis?
Our latencies are around 500 to 700 milliseconds.
Wow, this is fast.
Accuracies around 95%. So.
Wow.
The decoding, the decoding we're doing is, the simpler we create the decoding, the easier the ability to use it. So our subjects in our studies, we want them using it immediately, first time, straight out of the box, no training. And so we're focused on really, it's kind of like we're not doing there's much more sophisticated decoding that's going on in different areas. We've realized that fundamental decoding, generating dependable, easy to use key presses can have huge impact for patients.
Yeah, absolutely it does. Yeah, absolutely. And most of us, despite having a voice, like to use text nowadays and to use those devices, so it would be fine.
Text is the number one thing that people, if you lose your ability to control your phone, the first thing you want back is texting.
Yeah, so which is what you're going to be able to restore.
Yes.
Tell me about the regulatory environment for what you're doing. I mean, it's incredible what you're working on. It's a field that didn't exist a few years ago.
Right.
So the world doesn't know how to deal with it, both from a policy point of view, insurance companies, and even culturally, for the readiness of it. How are you dealing with that? Because there are, there's also talk about super soldiers, augmented humans, and that's what brain-computer interface sounds like to a lot of people.
Yeah, so the field did start with defense funding, and it the early, around 2005, the US Defense was putting money into solving brain technology issues. That spending is now, the US Defense is not doing it as much, and I think for an implantable BCI perspective, there's been a shift away, but the early investment came from US Defense, and now it's moving into a medical application. Actually, because of that, some of the early DARPA funding went in through Jack Judy. Actually, Jack Judy was one of the early DARPA program managers. He had the foresight to put some people in FDA. I think this is like 2012. He placed people in the FDA to start thinking about what regulation of an implantable BCI might look like. So actually, the FDA under Carlos Peña's leadership in 2014 had the first release draft guidance of an implantable BCI.
Okay.
Now he left, David McMullen has come in, who's now the new head of FDA, and he's a BCI. He's the head of the neuro division, and he's a BCI guy. And he has come in putting a huge amount of energy into pulling companies towards approval, and the field's getting very organized. So as far as regulatory bodies go globally, the FDA is the only regulatory body that has a view on how implantable BCI should be done. So we're having very sophisticated conversations, really a lot of trust being built up, and we know what we need to do to get approved.
Okay, so then the medical community, and when it comes to the insurance area, you are fine once you have the FDA clearances, or when they know how to place you in that.
Yeah, I think the critical conversation happening right now, which is going to be the key to success for Synchron, is have we characterized the clinical endpoint clinical meaningfulness in a clinical trial, because that doesn't exist yet. There's no scale for how a BCI works. And we're working with David Petrino from Mount Sinai, who's put out a paper recently with the idea of a digital motor output, which is a unit of measure, and it really looks at, you just said to me, how fast does the click work? That's a fundamental unit. So we want to show that our patients can make selections on the screen when they want, as quickly as X, and that we can demonstrate that as the clinical utility of the system, and then that's how we'll show that it's working. And then so thinking down the line, you have a BCI, it stops working. You go to hospital, you go to your doctor, it's like, why is my BCI not working? And you'll go through the same processes, why is your hand not working? So I like, there's, I'm trained in stroke, and sometimes people come to hospital looking like they've had a stroke, and they are just sick, or like they might have an infection, and their brain is not working as well, and they look like they're having a new stroke. BCI is going to be a digital appendage to your brain, which is going to stop working as a part of your brain like any other part of your body. So the whole point of this clinical metric for the study is, what is a scientific and clinically meaningful mechanism that we can say that it's working, and how can we measure that? And then we can hand that over to the clinical community, and they can make determinations on how well it's working.
Okay, well, great. I would like to understand what would drive a neurologist. You are a neurologist, right?
Yeah.
To think that I have to really go in and just directly connect it to the brain and make something work that way. This isn't how most neurologists think. Like, so what got you to go this direction?
So the first BCI article I read was in 2008 by Lee Hochberg. It was published in Nature in 2006. And I got kind of became a fanboy of the BrainGate program. And it just for me, as soon as I read about BCI, it felt like it was going to be transformative. But my co-founder, Rahul Sharma, who is now the director of the Stanford Interventional Cardiology Lab, we went to medical school together in Australia. And he was obsessed with interventional cardiology, so the plumbing into the heart. And I started to get really interested in the plumbing into the brain. But plumbing is kind of plumbing, like it's mechanical and...
Yeah, because most people, when they talk about the brain, they talk more about the
electrophysiology.
Yes,
so
they talk more of the electrical,
right,
not the plumbing.
So in medical school, I did an honors degree in transcranial magnetic stimulation, in depression, in psychiatry actually, in schizophrenia. But it gave me a taste of electrophysiology. And it's, you start reading about electrophysiology, and that's like getting to the heart of how the brain works, consciousness, about, what is the foundational unit of brain activity. And then like the field of synchronization, oscillations, that's why I called the company Synchron. It's these foundational electrophysiological phenomena that are the basis of consciousness. That's where I get really excited. And BCI is, you have to reverse engineer that to make it work. So I think I came from a sort of excitement around electrophysiology, but then using the plumbing of the brain to be a novel way of basically introducing a telecommunications network into the brain that is completely invisible and non-invasive.
So given the body of data that you're creating in the process of building your brain-computer interface, and so are so many other companies, the question just behooves all of us about what is the application of AI, not just in decoding the data that you're getting, but just, using it for new innovations or new perspectives. How do you see the field in the next 20 years?
I'm thinking about AI applications in BCI in two regards. One is you've got a signal to noise issue, right? There's a lot of, some of our patients, sometimes we have different algorithms that we use to decode motor intent. Some of the algorithms have lower accuracy but are faster. And so if you're watching YouTube, they'll suddenly, things start firing off, and they'll be sitting there watching YouTube and it'll start doing some false clicks. And we're realizing is it noise or is it signal? And so it's actually signal. So a lot of the noise issue in the brain is other brain signals coming in. There's lots of different activity going on. It's all context dependent. One of the biggest areas there's this thing called the P300, which is your brain kind of shooting off when you see something unusual or different or weird, and your brain just kind of goes there. And that's detectable widespread. So knowing that, so what AI is going to do is give kind of context dependent and ability. So all of a sudden in BCI, that sort of a blip might be detectable as, if the system knows, you've just had a moment of thinking something new, then that context dependent is going to give these feedbacks into how the system works in ways that aren't, so the AI is going to provide context dependent interactability, which is going to be really incredible. And then, so that's on the decoding part, and then on the integrations applications part, I think personalized AI is going to be really powerful and we're already building it in, like using LLMs like ChatGPT, superpowered predictive text integrations are hugely beneficial for our patients. So,
I can imagine. I mean, they're good for us, and if someone is struggling with it, it goes much faster. Yeah. Tell me about, where do you think that most of your work lies in? Is it more on the analytics side, the AI that you're building on top of it to decode those signals, or is it that your superpower is that you have the most amount of data that you collect from the brain?
Yeah, we're getting ready for AI. We're actually specifically not using deep learning applications yet. And the reason for that is that we're building a really deep foundation of a new platform. And we want to really understand what the core of our signal is. So we're using, and furthermore, the FDA gets a little bit nervy on black box approaches, because the FDA, and reasonably so. Like, what are you doing with that brain data, and how are you thinking about what weights to apply?
No, that's it. I was just saying that also we were just talking about the different kind of implants, right? Like we talked about the ones in the brain, and we talked about yours, which is much less invasive. And I was saying that how you probably have to do more analysis because you have
what's
less
our sweet
data.
Spot? Yeah.
Because more is not always better. So maybe you don't need as much to be able to get the work done, I suppose. Because the one criticism we get when we see the comparison between Synchron and some of the other companies is you collect much less data compared to them, yet you're promising pretty impressive outcomes.
First of all, there's no other company doing human clinical trials yet.
That's true. You already had that one.
Well, I think just to say, compared to the other companies, like when the questions are, compared to, I know how hard it is to get a fully implanted, miniaturized, powered device into a human body. So the potential of what's coming is really interesting and exciting, but it's really hard to make a product be easy to use and simple to use. So if the question is like, what is the level of performance that's needed to be impactful? Because there seems to be a assumption that you need a high channel count system to be impactful for patients. That's not been our experience. If you can deliver clicks on an iOS screen to give Apple control back, even if it's a bit slow, as long as it's dependable and it's easy to use, that's life-changing. So we're starting there, and I think we think we've got the sweet spot for when to enter into the market, when to provide a product. And at that point, we're going to miniaturize our system and start to grow into other areas of the brain and start to build upon that. So it's not like, you're starting at that point, that's the limit of your technology. We've chosen an entry point with a design freeze that we think is meaningful, and we've got some really exciting things coming down the line.
How do you feel culturally? Do you think culturally people are ready, both in the medical community and in just the general population with disabilities, to try something like this? And what are you doing to prepare them?
I think it's a kind of ableist perspective, where only people who this platform is for people who have lost their ability to physically engage with the environment. So I think for the transhumanist questions that come about, like, are we ready? You just go and spend 5 minutes with someone who is not able to, who's dependent on someone else, and it seems like a perfunctory question in my mind. I'm not dismissing the idea that there's probably a point in time where this technology does have a transhumanist implication, in that probably the moment when it's working better than your 10 fingers and there's a demand that goes into the augmentative, that there probably is that time coming. I think it's a long way away. And I think in the meantime, we've got an opportunity to have a technology to help literally hundreds of millions of people who are not able to control technology that we sort of take for granted. And there's like a lot of negativity around tech, and you lose it and then you realize how incredibly lucky we are. Like we are, at this point in history, we have never been so lucky to have such a high level of quality of life, and we take it for granted a little bit.
No, I just mean, for example, if you look at our society today, most patients are, generally, like Medtech devices there aren't so many still. We are used to doing therapeutics and drugs and diagnostics and whatnot. Even for diagnostics, we have a hard time wearing like even a monitor or whatnot. So I feel that you guys have a lot of work cut out for you ahead of you, that you have to basically coach people. It's okay to get this installed and it'll be okay.
I don't know. Brian Gormley at the Wall Street Journal wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago about in Medtech that neurotech is the fastest growing area within medical devices. You can now get a device from a company called Inspire that stops you having sleep apnea. You don't need to use that sleep machine anymore. There's a device that can go into your spine that stops you having pain. There's a device that can go into your neck that helps you recover with stroke. There are all these devices that are popping up, and neuromodulation and implants is really fast growing. So I don't like, people are a little bit scared of deep brain stimulation, but for the most part, there's so many devices in the body now. We have hip implants, we have cardiac pacemakers, we have people. When you lose function, you want it back, and getting an implant to restore function or relieve some level of immobility, which just works and is invisible, is I think it's a really, really fast-growing area.
So when it comes to the risk of it, I interviewed a neurosurgeon right before you, and I was saying, it's kind of lucky that you're a neurosurgeon, because most people who come in for neurosurgery, their expectations are so low that 50-50, they're fine with whatever happens. They take that big chance. Someone goes to a cardiologist, they want to walk out of there and be fine in a week or so. Their expectations. So given that the outcome or the life or the limiting conditions that these patients have, do you think that willingness to try something new gives you also the license to maybe try more dramatic approaches or applications or trying experiments that you wouldn't have?
So we're starting with brain-computer interface. Once we can demonstrate both sensing and stimulation inside a blood vessel in the brain, we think that we can have a big impact in other areas like epilepsy, Parkinson's disease.
Wow, that's amazing. Parkinson needs help, yeah.
Brain injury. So we're not experimenting, but I think there are precedents that have required more invasive approaches to get into the brain. And I really just look back at cardiology. The field of cardiothoracic open heart surgery is much smaller than it was 15 years ago, because a lot of things are now treatable. Valves, stents for heart attacks, resynchronization devices, arrhythmias like afibrillation that need ablation therapies. Incredible work with ablation, where they just zap the part of the tissue and it corrects the issue. What's happened in cardiology, the trend towards minimally invasive, it's happening in the brain. And so I think the thing that we couldn't control, which we're very lucky, is that the field of neurointervention or neurovascular has massively exploded over the last 15 years because of stroke therapies, which are mechanical, pull out a blood clot. And we are now coming and stepping on the shoulders of that with an electronics solution. So I'm really excited. We're in one small area of the brain right now, but we understand how to get to many, many different areas. We're just focused on paralysis, but in the background we're miniaturizing, scaling, and getting ready for a very long trajectory with this company to make many different products.
So is the performance of people who have a certain intent and want to perform a certain action better than they would have been normally when they use your device?
Yes, that's a good question, and yes, it is for sure. And it's
they make fewer typists.
It's an interesting. There's for some of the conditions that we are dealing with, they're progressive. Like ALS is a progressive neurodegeneration, and we have had a spectrum of stage, and we definitely see there are some advantages to having it earlier. The problem is that to prove that it works, you have to show that it's gone in and it's made a huge impact and a difference. So it's this kind of catch-22. You could use it better if it goes in earlier, but you don't really need it. So we have to find that sweet spot for clinical studies to show that the patients absolutely needed this, that it made a difference, that we can measure that. Then we'll get it approved, and then over time, hopefully it gets safer and more efficacious, and we'll see how it rolls out.
So the purpose of these interviews is not just to learn about your technology, but to get to know you. So we want to see another side of you, which is more the young kid, the dreamer, who just thought, why the brain? Why not some other part of the body? What got you into this?
I started out wanting to do psychiatry, actually. Actually started in psychiatry training. So I got obsessed with the brain as like a 14-year-old, as a teenager.
Yeah.
I think at that point I was like really interested in brains, space, and the ocean, because they felt like the three biggest mysteries. So I think I was romanced by unknown things. And then I started just getting really interested in how the brain creates the sensation of consciousness and what that means. And then I started psychiatry training in medical school, and I still am kind of like a frustrated psychiatrist. That would have been another pathway for me, and it's been amazing to see how psychiatry is, the whole movements of psychedelic medicine and has been incredible. But I was like, it's too sort of, psychiatry diagnoses were too socially engineered. So I went back to neurology because it was more of a biological framework.
That's true.
Yeah.
So that's how you got into it.
Yeah, and then it's been like 20 years. I did medicine, I did internal medicine, I did an honours degree in transcranial magnetic stimulation, I did internal medicine training, neurology residency, a stroke fellowship, and then an endovascular neurosurgery fellowship. So like 20 years of training through medicine.
Actually, that brings me to another point, which is that if I look at a lot of other brain-computer interface companies, they're not built by doctors. How does your being a doctor and a physician help you see it differently?
I think for right now, I'm really focused. I was trained on how to interpret clinical trials. What it takes to get into New England Journal of Medicine, what a really well-conducted phase 3 study looks like. And I was involved in some. So I think my focus and predilection is towards building a technology that can map to a clinical outcome that's meaningful. So maybe that's a difference.
Is this your first time at the BrainMind Summit?
It is. Yeah.
So why don't we talk about that? It's interesting you mentioned it on your own, that you're interested in consciousness and whatnot. So we talk about the BrainMind Summit. It's not just about the physical brain, but what does the mind represent and how it views the world, how it interacts with it, what our subconscious is, what is consciousness by itself. I'm sure that you're very busy building these devices right now. But how do you see that field or that understanding growing with our understanding of the brain, given all the things that you all are doing in the neurotech space?
My favorite thinker is Carl Jung, and I feel like his work has not been carried on. And my view on consciousness and the subconscious is that the interplay between the ego and like the subconscious or the id is playing out in ways, and I think that's what we're seeing with psychedelic medicine now. I think psychedelic medicine is a avenue to help the ego get a little bit more perspective and recreate itself, but only once you've stepped away, and that's what happens when we sleep every night. So I still think about all these things in biological systems, and that's actually what Jung did. Jung was very biological, but that kind of the gap between neurology and psychology is still massive in medicine. And so I think it's an amazing time where these things are coming back together.
Yeah, I think that's what is the importance of a summit like this, where you bring people from completely, very closely connected, but fields that don't talk to each other. So that's great. Well, thank you for your time. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Bye.
My hopes for the future of neuroscience are an ability to integrate the impact of our subconscious manifestations in our waking world in a way that lets us be kinder to one another. I think this is my first BrainMind. I think the thing that struck me at BrainMind is the melting pot of different perspectives from different disciplines, all kind of converging on that brain-mind problem with very different viewpoints. And there are some serious scientists, and there are some kind of very colourful characters here that are thinking differently. So I've really enjoyed that aspect of it.